What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish at the Moment. In this video, I'm going to be preparing for an upcoming fishing trip on Lake Hudson in Oklahoma. We're going to be using Google Earth and Navionics to pick the areas I plan on fishing and walk through all the steps that I use to prepare for a fishing trip. Let's get into it. Let's start with an overview of Lake Hudson. It's one lake down from Grand Lake in Oklahoma on the same chain of lakes. This lake, though, is a lot shallower and muddier than Grand Lake, which is just to the north. There's a lot of shallow water cover, backwater areas, and also some main river areas with a lot of current. One of the defining features of Lake Hudson is that there's actually two smaller lakes that feed the back of its two major creeks here. It's interesting because both of these lakes have relatively clearer water than Lake Hudson itself. This usually means that the back half of these two creeks has clear water, and that's going to hold a lot of fish when the water temperatures are cold. We're going to be fishing here in the first week of March, and that means that we're probably dealing with water temperatures in the mid to high 40s. In those conditions, it's not that great to be fishing on the main river where you have a lot of cold, muddy water. Instead, it's better to get back into these creeks that have clear water, and it's going to be important to figure out which one of these creeks has the clearest water as soon as I get to the lake. The creek that looks most interesting to me is the one on the left. There are two reasons for this. The first is that it's fed by Lake Spavinaw, which is a lake that I've fished in other videos in the past and that has aquatic vegetation. I'm not sure if any of the grass like hydrilla and milfoil that's in this lake flows down through the actual dam and gets into this creek, but there's a potential that there's some grass back in here that could attract a lot of big largemouth and also clear up that water. If we zoom in further, another thing that's pretty interesting about this creek is that it has a nice combination of flatter water and steeper banks. If we actually take the lake down using historical imagery from Google Earth Pro, we can see that there are some nice flat areas that probably can hold some bass in some of these drains and ditches, and there's also some standing timber, if you look really closely, that the bass might suspend in as well. At the same time, there's some really defined creek channels that create some steeper banks right here and right in this area that have some chunk rock on them. The combination of shallow water chunk rock as well as these offshore flats with the ditches and the standing timber give me a lot of different options to target these pre-spawn bass. I'm not sure if the fish are going to be related more to the offshore flats or the offshore areas, or if they're going to be by these steeper channel swing banks, but I at least have two really good options to check out that are consistent patterns for these pre-spawn bass. The one wild card is if there's actual offshore grass in the back of this creek. This means that this whole flat could be covered up in grass, and I might be able to catch fish on the edge of some of these steeper drop-offs or on these flats fishing in that grass. We can also take a look at this creek using a Navionics map. I put the Google Earth image and the Navionics image side by side so we can compare the lake when it's drawn down to the contour lines here. If you do want to learn how to actually take the lake down using historical images on your lake, I'll link a video right here that explains exactly how to do it and how to transfer pins that you can drop on this map straight to your fish finder. I've talked about that a lot before though, so I'm not going to get into it in this video. Now if we take a look specifically at the Navionics map, you'll notice that the deeper water sections line up pretty consistently. You have a creek channel that runs down this bank on kind of the south side of this creek, which means that this entire bank down here is going to be steeper. This could be a great place to throw a finesse jig, an Alabama rig, or jerk bait, and you also have a little bit deeper water as well, way back behind the shallow flat. And you can see that as well with this little creek channel. If we actually scroll over here, you can see there's a little hole back in here even that's a little bit deeper that you wouldn't really be able to notice if you were just looking at a normal Google Earth image with the lake, not being drawn down. This is actually an area that's really productive for me on a lot of these lakes in the kind of middle of the pre-spawn and even the early pre-spawn. It's these last little holes way back in the back of these creeks where there's just enough deep water back there to hold some bait fish. A lot of guys wouldn't go way past this flat over here and get into super deep water. Again, if we take that lake down back to this image, there we go. And as you can see, there's some sandbars actually that have formed here that when the lake is at normal pool might be in 3 or 4 feet of water, maybe even less than that. But there's a little bit of deeper water that runs in back in here. And my hunch is that if I can find 7, 8, 9 feet of water back in here with some clear water, and this contour map is accurate, there may be some really good fish that have hunkered down from these flats and are waiting until that water warms up enough to move further back into this little cut back in here to spawn. There may also be a way to get past this area back into here, but it looks pretty sketchy. Honestly, it looks like it might be completely silted in. So I'm not going to try to push too far back up in this creek because it's just going to be a big waste of time. Instead, I'm really going to focus on this last channel swing back in here, as well as this big channel swing bank here. Now at the same time, again, we have a nice big offshore flat in this area of the lake. This massive flat here on Navionics is in between maybe 6 to 10 feet of water, and it drops off in several places with a few key little ditches and deeper holes in this big flat. It's going to take a lot of effort to maybe graph this entire flat or look through it, but if I can find a little wad of fish out here on this flat, there's a chance I could load the boat very, very quickly. And there may not be that many guys that even look out here because it's just this really kind of boring looking flat area. But again, if there's a 1 or 2 foot depth change on this big flat, it could hold some really good fish. The main reason though that I like this creek is, again, the water visibility. If we zoom out, we can see that the main river over here usually has a lot more stain to it. And I would say that you might have, let's say, 6 inches to a foot of visibility in March out on the main river, but back into this creek, you may have 2.5 to 3 feet of water visibility just because it's being fed by this lake here. This is going to be key to getting aggressive, active fish on this lake. While you can catch fish in really dirty, muddy water, those fish just aren't normally as aggressive and they're a lot trickier to actually get to bite. So if I can find some fish in that clear water, I'm going to be in business. And I like this creek because it gives me a lot more options in terms of both offshore fishing and shallow water fishing. Really quick guys, if you're enjoying this breakdown so far and want information like this on your home lake, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Then go to the Lake Breakdowns page. Here you'll find our Fish the Moment Lake Breakdowns. We have 3 different anglers, myself, Matt Steffen, and Randy Blockett, that break down lakes all across the country. These lake breakdowns provide 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder. They have detailed area descriptions, keys for fishing the lake, bait recommendations, and a lot of other great information. And again, you can take these waypoints and put them straight to your fish finder so you can use them on your lake. There are a ton of lakes all across the country that we've already broken down, and they're broken down by season. You can do fall, winter, spring, and summer. If you scroll down, you can see all these different lakes here. There's so many that we have to offer, but if you can't find your lake, we also offer personal lake breakdowns for some of the smaller lakes, and we restock those every Monday. So definitely check out fishthemoment.com for either the stock map breakdowns or one of these personal ones. Moving further down Lake Hudson, we find another interesting creek that looks to have some clear water in the back half as well. The interesting thing about this creek is that it's fed by 2 different water sources. The first comes from this lake here and this pretty obvious dam. I don't know how often they pump water from that Clearwater Lake in the back of this creek, but even if they do it pretty irregularly, it should still bring some clear water back in there. But at the same time, there's also another creek that feeds the back end of this creek, and it looks like from historical imagery that there's dirty water sometimes that will come from the smaller creek. This means there may be a mixture of clear water and dirty water mixing, which is not a bad thing, it could be a really good thing, but if they're not pulling any water from that lake, that clear water in there, and there's only dirty water coming from that little creek there, it could mean that we have a lot of dirty water in the back of this creek, and my whole idea of finding clear water could go up in smoke. That's just a guess though, and a lot of times guys, when I'm preparing for these trips, it is kind of a guess. So this is not going to be my number 1 option to check out because I'm not sure what that water visibility is going to be. To get all the way back in here, I may have to idle or take some time, so I'm not going to start in this creek. I'm going to start in the other creek first because it seems like it's more of a sure bet that I'll find some clear water. But either way, it's good to have a backup creek just in case the first creek we look at doesn't pan out. The one thing I like about this creek, if you take a look at it on Navionics, is that it actually has some nice flat water that drops off into a channel, which would give you kind of like a ledge or some type of offshore drop-off that may hold some offshore fish around brush piles, standing timber, or bait fish. You can also see that there's some steeper banks all the way back into this creek, as well as some really nice chunk rock and riprap. If we take a look at the lake in this newer image, we have some nice chunk rock down this bank right here. We have some riprap in this area, and then we kind of get a little bit too shallow back up in here. And you also have several boat docks. Now, it doesn't look like these boat docks are super deep, but the ends of them might be in 10 to 12 feet of water, which is plenty deep enough if people plant brush piles out here. This is a great way to catch fish in the pre-spawn, throwing jerk baits over brush piles, fishing a jig around those brush piles, and it could be a really great deal. It also shows that there's a road bed here. I'm not necessarily seeing a road bed when I'm looking at the mapping here, but there's a potential that that road is there, and if there is, that could be a really interesting spot as well. These road beds on these Navionics maps are not always that accurate, so I wouldn't always bet on them being there, but if it is there, it'll be a nice, pleasant surprise. Also, as we get further out of this creek, you'll notice that the water is not necessarily as dirty because we're actually on the lower end of Lake Hudson. This gives me more options to actually fish the main part of this creek, even if I want to stay more in the back half, and I can focus on some of these steeper channel swing banks with some nice rock. You can see that the channel runs right up against them. There's also, again, some nice drop-offs out here that could potentially hold some fish further off the bank. And it just gives me several different options to choose from when I actually go fishing. The big thing about this fishing trip is that I'm not really planning on fishing one style. I'm not going to say I'm only going to fish offshore or only fish shallow, because I just have no idea what I'm going to be dealing with when I get to the lake. And at the same time, I don't know if there's enough water in the backs of these two creeks to allow me to catch my fish doing one thing in particular. I may have to catch a few fish on a couple boat docks, then maybe crank a channel swing bank, and then maybe fish some offshore areas, and try a bunch of different things to put 5 fish in the boats. The key, though, is I really want to focus on these creeks because it is going to be the areas that I'm at least predicting will have the clearest water, and I just don't want to try to struggle all day long fishing in stained, cold, muddy water on this main lake, or even in some of these other creeks that don't look to be as clear. So it's going to be an interesting fishing trip. Hopefully this preparation is going to pay off. I've taken a look at the lake on Navionics. I've tried to connect it with some of the factors like these other little creeks and lakes that are feeding these major creeks. And this is the process I go through a lot of times, guys, in the spring. I choose a few areas based on the factors that I can see, and then once I go out, I'm just going to make it happen in these creeks. I'm going to put a video out showing you how it goes, and if I don't catch anything, I'm also going to just show you that, show you what went right, what went wrong, how my preparation actually worked, or if it didn't work, and that's going to be a great learning lesson for both of us. So if you guys are fishing a really stained or muddy lake in the pre-spawn this spring, definitely be on the lookout for those clear water creeks in the back halves that are either fed by creeks like this or fed by an entirely different lake, and a lot of times it'll be the difference between catching no fish on these really dirty lakes and loading the boat. Hopefully it's the latter for me when I go fishing, and definitely stay tuned to the Fish the Moment YouTube channel and subscribe so you can see my challenge on Lake Hudson where I try to catch some fish out of these creeks. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see y'all next one.